Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're really focusing in on just one source, but it's incredibly rich. It's an excerpt from the BBC's WW2 People's War archive.
That's right. It's called Lucky Me Part 2, and it was submitted by Terry Brew. It details his father, Richard Brew's, experiences during the war.
And it's raw, it's personal, it's not the history book version.
Exactly. This is the ground-level view. What we want to do today is unpack Richard's story, pull out the key moments, the things that maybe surprise you, the hardships, definitely the hardships.
And the resilience, too, right, from his training days in England all the way through the fighting in Europe.
Yeah. What can this one man's account really tell us about that broader experience? That's the question.
It's like looking through a microscope, isn't it? You see these tiny details, but they speak volumes about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. It brings this huge concept, war, right down to, blistered feet, bad food, losing your mates, and just sheer luck sometimes.
Okay, let's get into it. We'll start before the battles, back in training. Richard Brew's account kicks off with some, well, let's call them memorable incidents. That kid inspection.
Ah, yes, the Blanco story. It's such a perfect little snapshot of that rigid, sometimes completely nonsensical discipline.
He left his kid out, the Blanco faded.
Right, overnight. He tried to explain, but his captain, this guy Johns, who Richard says had seen too much sun, and apparently tied his revolver like a cowboy, which is a detail in itself.
Yeah, quite the image.
He just wouldn't listen. And then the dog gets involved.
The dog, Susie. She barks 3 times, so he gets 3 days Janker's punishment duties.
And misses his birthday due with his mates.
Yeah.
It just immediately tells you, doesn't it?
Right.
Authority could be completely arbitrary. Discipline could depend on a captain's mood or his dog's bark.
And it wasn't just quirky captains. There was the issue with the signaler course, too.
Oh, yeah. He had a speech impediment, right. But they sent him anyway.
He tried to tell them, said it wouldn't work.
But off he goes. 4 days later, the instructor pulls him out, basically saying, "Who on earth sent you here?" It just shows that sort of, inefficiency sometimes. The system not quite paying attention.
So he ends up back at Lenham, manages a quick trip home, but then gets back just as his unit leaves for a big exercise.
So he misses it.
Yeah.
5 days, just hanging around. More waiting, more of that unpredictability. It wasn't all go, 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 even in training.
And the actual training under the 43rd Wessex, Monty's best division, he calls it, sounds intense and weird.
Yeah, turning night into day. Church parade at 10 p.m., route marches at 2 a.m.
He mentions getting food served at 1 a.m. one night. Soup and pudding.
In the same mess tin. He says this is a right mess. Imagine that. Soup and pudding mixed together in the middle of the night.
That detail, it really sticks with you. It paints such a picture of just being constantly disoriented, kept off balance.
It does. And, alongside all these odd routines and the discipline, his health actually starts to cause problems, even before combat.
Right. He mentions some pretty nasty conditions.
Septic scabies, then septic dermatitis, needed hospital stays. And the big worry for him wasn't just being ill.
It was being separated from his unit.
Exactly. The fear of being put into a holding battalion away from his mates. That was huge.
He even asked to be let out just for Christmas Day, didn't he? Just to be with them.
Yeah. It shows how fast those bonds formed, how vital they were becoming, even then.
And this is around the time he meets Lieutenant Hutchinson, right? Hutch.
Yes, a key figure. A friendship that, as he says, lasted a lifetime. Hutch really proves himself later on.
So after he recovers, they move base.
To St. Mary's Bay. A bit of luxury beds in a big house, though hot water was strictly rationed by the orderly Indian summer Chucky Harris. Classic nickname.
And here they face those really tough physical tests Montgomery insisted on.
Oh, yeah. 2 miles in 2 minutes, 10 miles in 2 hours, full kit.
Yeah.
Assault course, firing, grenade throwing, checks at corners, fail, you were out.
He mentions his mate Mucky did the 10 miles in 1 hour 50.
Including stopping for a pee. Amazing. It just captures this sort of lads, they were pushing themselves like that.
Then a new intake arrives, the Bodmin boys.
Mostly young lads, average age 19. Richard felt old at 27. One of them apparently called him a father figure.
That must have felt strange and maybe a bit heavy, knowing what was likely coming.
I think so.
Yeah.
And very quickly, the reality of how dangerous things were hits home, even in training.
The accident with the Hawkins mines?
Yeah, just after they left St. Mary's Bay,
Mm-hmm.
a demonstration went wrong. Lieutenant Wilson, who he says was really well liked, and Richard thinks maybe 28 men were killed.
Just like that. Not even enemy action. A huge shock.
A brutal reminder that life was fragile, period. not just on some future battlefield.
And the atmosphere starts to build, doesn't it? Leading up to D-Day, he says invasion was in the air.
Everyone on edge. They're seeing the Allied bombers constantly flying over. Then that incident with the flying fortress.
Crashing near their village.
Yeah, killed 4 of their own men who were just out for a walk. Just random.
His reaction is pretty stark, isn't it? When your time is up, then you've got to go.
That fatalism, you really see it emerging there. This sense that so much is just chance. And it's right around this time, knowing the invasion is close, that he finally accepts promotion.
Lance Corporal. He'd refused the stripes before.
Multiple times, apparently. Happy where he was. But the major showed him a letter, refuse promotion, get transferred.
And with the invasion imminent?
He couldn't risk being split from his mates. So he took the tapes, sent the extra pay home to his wife, May. It wasn't about ambition. It was about staying with his pals.
Loyalty, pure and simple. Okay, so then we get to the day itself. D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
Richard was actually on coal duty that day. When he got back to the coast, he noticed something was missing.
Those huge concrete blocks offshore.
Yeah, the Mulberry Harbor sections. Gone. Just a small personal observation of this massive event unfolding. Meanwhile, back home, May was looking for him at the London docks, completely confused about where the troops were.
Then they marched to New Romney and New Haven, locals cheering.
Waving flags. He found it impressive, but also really sad, knowing some of those cheering lads wouldn't be coming back.
That contrast again. Public celebration, private dread. Their crossing was delayed, though.
You till June 18th. They were held back specifically for the breakout phase from the beachhead. That was their job.
And the crossing itself sounds like hell.
He calls it the worst storm in living memory. They'd had sausages beforehand, which probably didn't help.
Oh, dear.
He describes just horrific seasickness. There's this incredibly graphic, but also very human, scene with him and Hutch both being violently ill together in this tiny toilet space on the Bren Gun platform.
Officer and NCO, just two incredibly sick men side by side. It levels everything, doesn't it?
Completely. So they finally land, cold, wet, sick, bivouac near a place called Rice, and their first casualty.
Yeah.
It wasn't what they expected.
Not from fighting.
No. Chap called Charlie Ball. Died in his sleep, peacefully. Richard knows how they were still unaccustomed to death then. Even a non-combat death was a real shock.
But then there's a moment of almost comedy at the River Don.
Right. 90 of them. Yeah. Stark naked, trying to have a wash in the river, get rid of the grime from the crossing. Having a bit of a laugh, probably.
And then
a punt comes around the bend. 2 local women and a man. Just sails right through the middle of all these naked soldiers. Richard says it was a sight they'd never forget.
Oh my goodness. A very awkward collision of worlds. Soon after, though, things get serious. New commander, Major Lipscomb.
And Richard says that was the beginning of our war. They advanced through Death Valley toward Shur.
But there was that moment with the farmer first.
Yes, amidst all the tension, advancing into danger. A farmer had left bottles of Calvados on a table by the road, one for each man passing.
A wonderful gesture, Richard calls it. A brief moment of grace.
Before reality bit back, hard. Entering the valley, the shelling started. Mortars, those moaning minis, the rocket mortars.
And this is where the casualties started mounting among his close friends.
Yeah, Dickie Evans, Bob Seymour killed, Jack Keevil wounded. These were guys he just shared that Calvados with minutes before.
The shock must have been indescribable.
He says the platoon went into it like a kind of shock. This wasn't abstract anymore. This was their mates. Hutch came over, put an arm around him, tried to offer some comfort, showing that leadership, that bond under extreme pressure.
And faced with this, Richard and Mucky did something, well, incredibly risky.
They crawled forward, just to look at a dead German soldier.
Huh.
Richard says it was a sort of desperate attempt to adjust ourselves to the death that was all around us now.
It sounds almost reckless.
Totally. He says it was pure luck they weren't picked off by a sniper. It just shows the psychological place they were in, trying to process it all.
The fighting just intensified from there. A scout mission where they nearly walked right into a lane full of Germans.
Yeah, a frantic retreat from that one.
Yeah.
And seeing the toll it was taking on others, Wally Hammond going bomb happy.
A pitiful sight, Richard calls it. The mental damage was becoming obvious. Then Hutch leads a patrol to try and capture a prisoner.
Taking Richard, Mucky, Johnny Martin, the core group, their objective is this rise on the map, Hill 112.
Just a map reference then, but soon to be a name synonymous with brutal fighting.
Absolutely. The battle for Hill 112. He describes it as just terrific noise. Tanks, guns, mortars, snipers. He's very honest, says he wasn't brave, he was very scared.
And that grim detail about marking where mates had fallen.
Rifle stuck in the ground, tin hat on top,
Mm.
in the long corn. It just paints such a picture of the chaos and the scale of the loss.
They had to dig in fast, mighty quick, or die.
The cost was horrific. 192 killed, wounded, or missing from their battalion alone. He talks about this numbness setting in, getting used to death but still feeling how random it all was.
4 days stuck on that hill, no hot food or drink because snipers had the supply lines pinned down.
And Scott Beckham cracking under the strain. Shell shock after a shell hit his rifle, he just disappeared.
Richard says when they finally came down off that hill, they were battle-hardened troops. It had changed them.
Forged in fire, quite literally. But even a brief rest period wasn't safe.
Their rest area got shelled.
Yeah. A Bren carrier blew up. Len Hawkins injured. Dusty Miller killed, copped a bullet, just vanished into the casualty clearing system.
Just gone. That randomness again.
He also remembers the constant noise of their own artillery going overhead, like an express train. A sound he shared memories of later with men from the Cornwall Regiment.
But there was a small morale boost, something practical.
The mobile bath unit. A chance to get properly clean. Richard knew the officer in charge made sure his lads got sorted with new underwear.
He explains why new was better than clean, doesn't he?
Yeah, the steam cleaning didn't kill everything. Lice, mites would just hatch out again. So new stuff was crucial. Little details like that made a difference.
After that brief break, it was back into the line, Brixar, which he calls chaos.
Lieutenant Spencer killed by a sniper there. Just constant danger. But then, amidst all that chaos, they found something.
Ah, the cider barrel incident.
Yes, during a Racina, a huge hogshead barrel full of cider.
So the platoon sneaked off, filling their water bottles.
Pretty much. Richard has this thought. If the Germans had attacked that afternoon, they wouldn't have met much resistance.
You have to laugh, don't you? Taking that risk for a bit of cider.
It's that coping mechanism, isn't it? Find relief where you can. Anyway, they secured Brixard, got relieved, and the next big objective loomed. Montpincon.
Described as a very high, steep hill, and the approach was tough.
Heavy fire at the bottom. They're sheltering in a hedgerow, bullets making that horrible crack and hiss sound going through the leaves right by them. And this is where Richard has that incredibly close call.
The bullet through his gear?
Yeah. Didn't hit him, but cut the straps of his webbing. His pack went flying back. He fell forward. Mucky thought he'd been hit.
He calls it a crease, not a hit.
The relief must have been immense. But then that chilling thought. 1 inch over then, I would have been upstairs with the boss. Followed by, thankfully it was not my turn.
There it is again. Luck, chance, inches deciding life or death. But others weren't so lucky on Montpincon.
No. Major Thomas, Jack Whiting, both popular men killed in that battle.
They fought their way up, reaching the summit after dark. Cold, thirsty.
Richard had the bright idea to ask a tank commander for water for a brew-up.
Didn't go well, did it?
The water in the jerry cans was actually fuel. Made them all sick, just adding misery to exhaustion. Me and my bright ideas, he says.
And even after the main battle, tragedy struck again. Bob Brooks.
Yeah, volunteered for a patrol, seemed safe enough, but his own grenade exploded prematurely, killed him instantly.
Death could come out of the blue, Richard writes. They didn't sleep easy that night. It just reinforces how danger was everywhere, even from your own equipment.
After Montpincon, General Horrocks came and congratulated them. Richard got promoted to full corporal, sent the extra pay to May. He even got 3 days leave in Brussels.
Which he found ironic.
Because by the time he got back, the whole regiment was in a rest area anyway. Just about summed things up, he felt. Typical army timing. But the rest didn't last. They were soon heading for the Seine.
Moving in those amphibious vehicles, the DKWs, or ducks.
And along the route, this amazing reception from the French people. Cheering, waving, giving them drinks and flowers.
A real sense of liberation.
Definitely. He says it gave them a real sense of what they were fighting for. A powerful moment.
Mm-hmm.
And during a halt, they found something else.
The officer's food dump?
Large mounds covered with tarpaulins, pinned fruit, cream, cigarettes, all the good stuff.
And they helped themselves.
They did. Richard says kit bags were best for carrying it. He defends it, saying they only took what they could carry. A bit of opportunistic liberation of supplies.
Arriving at Vernon near the Seine, their major, Watts, gets injured.
Which means Lieutenant Hutchinson Hutch is suddenly thrust into command. Richard mentions Hutch hadn't been listening too hard to the briefing.
Oh, dear.
But he says Hutch rose to the occasion superbly. really stepped up. Now, they had to cross the river itself.
In what he calls dodgy storm boats.
And it gets hairy fast. They get stuck on a mud bank. Then Private McLean accidentally fires his rifle.
How close was it?
"Bear 2 inches from the side off my face," Richard says. His first thought was to just chuck McLean overboard in anger and fear.
Terrifying. Another reminder of the danger from within their own ranks. Through accident or stress, they finally land, meet resistance guides, and then
Walk straight into a German strongpoint. Bloody Germans! Richard dives into a doorway with another soldier, Gitcham.
and the door was unlocked.
Incredible luck again. "God was really with me," he says. But Goss, right behind them, was killed instantly. Chaos. The Germans just lobbed grenades into the doorway, assuming anyone inside was dead or dying.
So Richard and Gitcham are trapped.
All night, in that doorway, in silence, listening, not knowing if the next person coming might be German, or even one of their own men mistaking them for the enemy. The psychological pressure must have been immense.
What happened in the morning?
Richard risked a lookout. Saw Germans carrying ammunition boxes. He opened up with his Sten gun, gave them a good long burst, killing them.
Which also signaled to his own mates nearby.
Exactly. They were foxhole close by, but thought Richard and Gitcham were dead. Huge relief all round when they realized they were alive.
And their escape route was unconventional.
They dug their way out, through the soft plaster walls of 3 adjoining houses, using their bayonets. Eventually reached the basement where the rest of the platoon had gathered.
Amazing. Reunited with Mucky again.
Yeah, Mucky had posted them as missing. Richard mentions showing the others how they dug through. Private McLean, the one who nearly shot him, couldn't help he'd been shot through both arms. They were eventually relieved by the Worcesters.
But even then, the danger wasn't over. The sniper incident.
Right. Richard's talking to one of the Worcester lads, and bang, sniper gets him. Richard drags the wounded man to cover.
And the sniper shoots him again.
Through the foot, while he's lying wounded. Richard says that was the point he truly started to hate the Germans. Something so nasty about that act. It wasn't just combat anymore. It felt personal, cruel.
A real turning point in his feelings.
Yeah.
So after Vernon, they pushed on.
Through the Fort of Vernon towards Gasny. Took a small chateau, faced counterattacks, lost a few more men.
They spent some time in Gasny itself.
Yeah, billeted with friendly locals. Richard stayed with a woman named Josephine. And here they witnessed something quite disturbing.
The head shaving incident.
The local resistance rounded up women accused of collaborating, shaved their heads publicly, marched them through town with a band playing, while the crowds booed and jeered.
A very different kind of violence. Public humiliation.
A stark contrast to the battlefield. They stayed in Gasny about 2 weeks, training replacements, getting kits sorted. More promotions to corporals became sergeants. Richard sending more money home, but always with that thought. Who knew if it was my turn tomorrow?
Never feeling safe, even when things were relatively quiet. But then the orders came to move again.
The Germans were retreating fast now. The journey became almost pleasant, riding on tanks through cheering crowds again.
He mentions feeling like heroes, thinking the war must be nearly over.
That sense of optimism returned. They pushed on through Belgium, into the Netherlands, Linhout, Descent, Nijmegen, crossing that bridge.
Towards Elst. And the landscape changed again.
Dead Germans everywhere, and the Dutch civilians scavenging their boots. A grim sign of the times. They dug in around a house in Elst, near a dike separating them from 12 platoon.
And initially it was quiet.
Relatively. The Germans were focused on Arnhem. Operation Market Garden was happening just north. But once Arnhem fell,
The focus shifted to them.
4 days of non-stop shelling. Heavy losses, again, including Major Stewart, killed in what was supposed to be a safe area. They buried them in the Arnhem Cemetery.
And intense fighting for the house opposite them.
Yeah, 12 platoons position. Germans overran it, took a prisoner. Then 12 platoon counterattack, took it back. Constant shelling, grenades being lobbed back and forth over the dike.
It sounds relentless. And then the shell hit their own roof.
Where Kenny, War, and Duke were sheltering, Richard ran over. Found Kenny badly hit in the foot.
Taking about half of his foot away, he says.
Richard carried him to the aid post. And he adds that post-war story, doesn't he? Visiting Kenny in hospital years later.
The chair collapsing.
Yeah. May's chair breaks, everyone bursts out laughing. A moment of pure, unexpected humor during a difficult visit. And Richard contrasts that laughing Kenny with the memory of him on Hill 112, making German prisoners dance by shooting at their feet.
It shows how complex these memories are, holding both the horror and the humanity. The war is drawing towards its end, but there's still fighting to do. Another patrol.
Major Hutchinson, now a major, organizes one. No volunteers this time. So Richard steps up. Sad let them sleep, he thinks. He goes with the new lieutenant, Potter.
Who is inexperienced.
Very. Richard felt Potter was a bit too keen to fire first and ask questions later. Richard had to advise caution. Lucky he had experienced men with him, Richard notes. They nearly fired on their own side.
Yeah, heard voices. Turned out to be a 12th platoon with a Canadian sergeant. Close call. And on the way back, they found the Germans had laid a new minefield right where they'd just walked. Constant danger, shifting lines. Then they get word they're being relieved.
By the American 82nd Airborne. They pull out that night, heading for the River Moss.
In total darkness again, holding on to coats.
Richard gets separated when the bloke in front, Parsons, loses his grip, just stumbles around in the dark until, by great good fortune, he bumps back into his group.
More luck. Then another river crossing in the DUKWs.
Which Richard still found terrifying. Bloody, enormous tanks looked like they'd sink, and halfway across...
The steering breaks.
That's it, the steering's gone, drifting helplessly towards a heavily mined riverbank.
How did they get out of that?
Spotted and rescued by boats from the far bank. Richard's classic line. If it wasn't the bloody Germans trying to get us, it was the bloody Service Corps.
You have to admire the dark humor and the perfect end to that day.
Reaching the marshalling area expecting a hot meal and getting cold soup, of course.
Just perfectly awful military logic. So now they're heading towards Germany proper, the Siegfried Line.
Through Grossbeek, Mook, seeing the wreckage from Market Garden, Richard missed feeling a bit worried about the Siegfried Line's reputation.
They found the area flooded.
Germans had opened the dikes. They pushed on to Cleve, which the 15th Scottish had supposedly cleared.
And it wasn't clear.
The Germans had let the Scots through, then hit Richard's unit hard as they entered, lost a lot of men. The town was just rubble.
Then onto Bedburg, attacking buildings, including an asylum.
Yes, a lunatic asylum. He describes the patients just wandering around amidst the fighting, some saluting, some trying to do drill. He says they found it funny at the time, but felt sorry afterwards. Just surreal.
And another sudden shocking loss, Sergeant Major Davies.
Killed by a single piece of shrapnel that came through a wall. Pure chance. Standing in the wrong spot at the wrong second. Richard reflects, appalling what we went through as young men.
The final push through the Reichswald forest to Xanten. Hard fighting.
Mucky gets wounded here, but wins the military medal for directing fire while under heavy attack. They get a brief rest until Genappe.
And then the Rhine.
The final major obstacle. Crossing in buffaloes this time, those huge tracked landing vehicles. Richard found this crossing about the scariest thing I had ever done. They looked like they'd sink, and getting out involved a dangerous 6-foot drop.
Just one more terrifying crossing near the very end. They break out of the bridgehead, late March 45.
Fighting stubborn and fanatical rearguards, took Varseveld at night, then advancing on Lockham, attacking across a cornfield.
And Richard gets snagged on barbed wire.
Which he firmly believes saved my life. Because right then, men crossing beside him were hit and killed by a sniper. That tiny delay saved him.
Incredible. The randomness is just relentless.
He got a tank to blast the trees where he thought the sniper was. Over 30 Germans surrendered. He admits looking for sniper badges on them. Not sure what he would have done.
Understandable. Then he goes into the captured house. Tank crew's having tea.
And ping. A single bullet through the window. Kills the tank driver instantly. Just like that. His turn, Richard says. Could have been him. Could have been Johnny Martin standing there. The tank crew were devastated.
And this happens on April 1st. Which has significance for Richard.
4 years to the day since his call-up papers arrived. He contrasts that memory safe at home, wife, son, with the brutal reality now. His own home bombed, lost everything far from home, and watching the bodies of 5 friends being taken away for burial that day.
It's an absolutely gut-wrenching moment of reflection, captures the immense personal cost.
The war is clearly winding down now. They move through Harlow, Hangelo, where they found an SSHQ.
And took some frustration out.
Smashed every single thing, he says. Had a lot of fun. Then found an egg packing plant, ate eggs until they were full of wind for a few days. Gave him a laugh. Small acts of release, maybe.
Maybe. Less fighting now. They reached Bremen easily.
And then, just like that, it stopped. On his order. Stand down.
Oh.
They weren't to dig Bremerhaven.
How did that feel?
Felt a bit strange, Richard says. Abrupt, and his immediate reaction right then when it was finally over.
Tommy Handley suggested a service.
Yeah, but Richard didn't want that. He wanted to walk off alone, to think about the mates he'd lost.
How many were left from his original group?
Only 4, he says. Just 4 who started that journey with him. That solitary walk says so much about the bonds, the loss. His account basically ends there, mentioning being posted back to cell, life relaxing, guard duty, keeping the Germans safe from the Poles, he adds, hinting at more stories.
Richard Henry William Brew, 1915 to 1997. What an incredible account. It's just this dense tapestry of fear, loss, friendship, dark humor, and just sheer unbelievable luck sometimes.
We've really traced that thread, haven't we? From the weirdness of training through the absolute necessity of those bonds with mates, the shocking randomness of the battlefield, those little moments of humanity like the Calvados, contrasted with the cruelty like that sniper incident, and just the sheer psychological weight of it all.
Looking at this one story, this deep dive into Richard Brew's words, it really hammers home that behind all the big history, the maps, the dates, there are just countless individual lives, each one experiencing this mix of horror, resilience, and sometimes these fleeting moments of, well, normalcy or even grim laughter.
And it constantly circles back to chance, doesn't it? Survival being about inches, being caught on wire, a shell landing there instead of here. So here's something to think about. For those who lived through it, knowing that your survival often wasn't about being better or braver, but just luck, maybe even at the cost of the person next to you, because it just wasn't your turn. How does carrying that knowledge, that memory of pure randomness, shape how you understand history, how you feel it, long after the guns fall silent?